Good morning and welcome to What's in Your Wardrobe. And today I've got Kerry, and Kerry actually was the founder and owner of Harlow. How did you start Harlow? When did it start? Tell us a bit of background info.
We started Harlow in 2012 in November. I'd been already working in the industry probably for about 13 years. So this was my second career. I went back to TAFE when I was 29. So I've been in various stages of my career. And because it was during that time of, I think 1990, I have to think about what date that is. 1998 was when I started in the industry, and we were still making locally. So quite a few people were still making, like it was starting to move offshore, but it wasn't quite where everybody had, it was only tiny little dribs and drabs. So I learnt onshore. That's how I learnt everything is being done onshore. And I started off as a pattern maker for a vertical retailer who isn't around anymore. But that's how I started out. And then, I started as a production person. Then I moved into pattern making in that same role, and then moved into product development, where we dealt with people like Sportsgirl, Target, Kmart, and that was still all made locally at that time when we were making it out of there with local manufacturers. So that was a really, really great hands-on experience to be able to touch everything, see everything, speak to all the makers, do all that sort of thing, not just getting parts of a business, which when I think you start onshore, unless you're getting to travel offshore and meet people, you don't actually get the same idea of how things come together, because you don't actually get to see them with your own eyes. You don't get to have those relationships. I mean, we're a lot better now because of Zoom and we're used to things like that, but still nothing like being in somebody's factory to actually understand what goes on.
I can remember those times very well. I'm surprised we didn't meet each other back then. But and when you first started with China and you were faxing everything back and forth, like trying to explain everything by fax, and then the fax would break. And so why did you start Harlow?
So I started Harlow because I'd always felt there was this gap in the market for clothing above a size 12 or 14. I've always been on the upper side of whatever is considered the general size, if you want to call it general, because there isn't a general size, but where clothes would go to. I would be either at the very top end when I was a teenager, when everything went to either a 12 or a 14, or early 20s, I would always be the 14, and sometimes I wouldn't fit into it. So being on the cusp of that, I always found it very difficult. And that's the reason I started sewing for myself when I was 13. So that's really where I think the love of fashion came, was the fact that I couldn't find what I wanted, that I then had to be more creative. I could be more creative. So I either had to make my own pattern, as in use a Butterick or a Simplicity pattern, and then I would Frankenstein it to how I wanted it to fit, because my body didn't fit the same as a pattern that was coming straight out of the packet, like my biceps were bigger, or I was shorter in the torso, or things like that, and I'd Frankenstein it together and sort of work it out, and just sort of did it that way. And so I thought, if I'm having such trouble, everybody else must be having that sort of trouble. And really, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, when I was going to nightclubs and things like that, and wanting to go out, trying to find an outfit that wanted to say what I wanted to say from a shop was impossible. I would have to go to stores that really technically, and my mum's only 19 years older than me, that she shopped at, but in that day and age, it was a big gap in the 80s, for, what my mum wore when she was, let's say, for example, 40, and what I wore when I was 40 was a very different thing, or even when she was 30, so things were different then. So when she was shopping for, and she was, say I was 18 and she was 37, right? The age group was much bigger than it is now. It was like almost a whole different area, So I was looking a lot, if I wore what they wore, unless I customized it, what I could buy, I would look probably either a lot older than my age because of what I was wearing, or very dowdy to some degree. So just for me, being an 18-year-old, it's just a different, vibe, especially back then. And so I started sewing for myself, and I knew that all along, that all my life, that there wasn't enough out there. And when I started working, my last 2 roles were when I started Bell Curve into Maya, and then it was a concept for myself, and then Maya dropped it because the way that they do when they start a new brand, if it doesn't take off, they don't give it more than a season, and then it's just the way that business is. And then it was bought by Target, and I was headhunted for that role while I was actually still at Harlow. But it was sort of like, and I went, you know what, there is space out there for places. Like, people kept telling, through the Bell Curve social media, I was starting to look at more social media and things like that, and seeing that there was so much needed in all age groups too, because by then things had changed dramatically. That's only 12 years ago. And by then, that gap between a 37-year-old and an 18-year-old is not so big excuse me, I just moved my camera, is not so big anymore fashion-wise. So even the 37-year-old and the 40-year-old needed different options. And, not to diss Millers, because they've changed over the years as well. But, at a stage, they were really more for over 60s, and we were all given that as an option. So I just felt like I started Harlow really more to help women feel better about themselves by being able to find clothing that fitted them and was made for them, and did all that. It was more about that, and it was really, that was my passion, about making sure that people didn't feel like I did.
No, it was a really successful business as well. And you must have had so many highs and lows going through that business. Tell us about some of the highs and lows through the Harlow timeframe.
I'd say one of the first lows we had is when I foolishly started out, and I, even though I didn't make big units, but coming from wholesale, and then I came into working for our business, even though we were making 50s and 100s compared to 500s or 5,000s, it wasn't small enough. And that left us with a lot of stock by 18 months in. However, there wasn't extenuating circumstances in the fact that we did have, when we started, we had a contract with the Iconic. The first couple of months was $20,000, $30,000 at wholesale, and then they totally swapped to dropship. So that's the reason we ended up with other reason I also started with bigger units, not because we had something in place, but that would have been the biggest one, because it sort of, we ate up all the money that we had put aside to have for the business and just had stock, Yeah,
it's hard. Because what happens is you're actually at the ebb and flow of somebody else's business, and if they change where they initially thought they were going, and I mean, I can understand why they're now doing it the other way, because basically they don't have to hold any stock, and they don't have to get rid of any stock. It's unfortunate that these days the customer doesn't actually understand that they're actually causing a lot of the problems of the landfill and everything by people having to purchase a certain amount of stock to put it out there, and they don't pre-order things. Like a lot of those small companies now are actually turning to pre-order. People have to think about what they're going to wear for that season and actually pre-order it, and that would have been perfect actually for where you were at that time.
Absolutely. But you also need to have a customer base really before you can go to pre-order, or you need to start really, really slow, because I mean, it's not impossible, right, to start with pre-order, but it's easier when your customer already knows what your product is, what they're going to get. They already know who you are, they know you've got integrity. They know that if something goes wrong, they're going to be able to, get a refund or return, all that sort of thing. So pre-order really, it can work from the get-go, right? But it would take, unless you had a decent amount of marketing dollars, you would need to actually do it slowly, go through it slowly it would take a lot longer to get to be able to sell a decent amount of units at pre-order, because even our customers, when we turned to pre-order, which was early 2023, some of them said they would never pre-order, and they've been buying for us from 10 years, and it was just something that they wouldn't do, right? So, we couldn't do anything about that. It was just well, this is what we're doing. If there's any stock left over, then so be it. If there's not, then sorry, this is how we have to work towards being able to be around, because otherwise you can't be around. So I think pre-order is a great way to go, because it devalues all our products when we've got way too many out there.
That's right.
It just devalues it, and it's really, it means that you also need, what I loved about it, and a lot of customers said, is that by pre-ordering, I knew I was needed to be willing to wait 6 to 8 weeks for it. I knew I needed to be willing to, take a chance. So I knew when I bought that, I really wanted it. It wasn't and for us, being the brand that we were, that was what we wanted, because we didn't want anybody to ever keep anything that didn't feel great on them. So we wanted them to take that second choice, whereas other brands might have gone, oh no, then we're going to miss out on a sale. Do you know what I mean? Because we weren't about sell as many as we can today. We were about selling what we could to keep ourselves sustainable, but also to make sure that it was doing the right thing for our customer and for landfill, and for for us to feel good about it, because making things and knowing that they're going to, God forbid, I would hope not getting thrown out, but just automatically being sent to, donation places without being worn or being worn once and things like that is not the way that fashion should be done.
No.
Not the way that not that is the way that anything should be done. Any product should be bought. So that's the biggest, that was our biggest mistake early on. And probably my biggest high was the fact that when WGSN, somewhere in 2014, pulled us out as one of the plus size brands to watch, and did we were part of their one of their reports. And you only understand this if you're in this industry, what WGSN means. But that's when you've spent in the industry so many hours trawling the site, looking for inspiration, and then you're on that inspiration. That's pretty amazing,
Oh yeah, that's fantastic. As the business owner, you have to weigh all of the highs and all of the lows. What was that pressure like in doing that? It must be enormous when you've got a certain amount of staff that you have to keep and help them do their job properly, and everything actually falls on you in the end, basically, their livelihoods and yours.
Look, we only took on, we had one floating casual probably from 2015, who picked and packed for us, and then we only took on really full-time staff in about 2019. But when it was like that, it wasn't just about, I had being a small business owner, you have way too many items on your to-do list regardless, right? Regardless of if you've got staff or not, right? And then you've got your staff members, and then you're trying to ensure that you've got everything you have needed to complete done, so that they can do their role, because they can be held up if you haven't actually thought all the way through what they need to do, especially if you're doing something about the future things. Some things they can just work rotely, but if you want something to get done by a certain date, you need to have done the handover and done the thinking behind it. And then that's extra pressure about time wise, and and then sometimes the way you've done that is there's no changing again afterwards, because it's like whatever it is now, because you just need to keep going. So that was pressured. But when we took on staff at the time, we were we were growing quite, not dramatically, or growing reasonably, like 10 to 20% a year, you know, and we would launch, even though we weren't pre-order, we would launch new products on a, because we didn't launch in collections. We had, after about 18 months in, we started launching like you would in a retail store, where you would bring one new product in every week. So we would do that instead. So what we did then was, and because we make locally, that's possible for us to do that. Whereas anybody that makes offshore, you either, to be fiscally responsible and not just, but to not cost you a whole lot of money by airing things in or going through the freight charges for one item and then putting LCL and not being able to find it and it going lost and all that sort of stuff. You bring in collections, because then you bring the whole lot in, and you've either got to decide to spread it, to put it out all as a collection, or hold on to yourself, which you're technically holding on to cash as you're doing that because you paid for it. So, but that's where making locally made that a little easier for us. And it meant that we could also be flexible as well, where, you know, like if something didn't come in early, like wasn't finished early enough and something else was, we could swap them around, you know, we could do all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't so bad then, but it was still pressure, but financially it wasn't pressure. Like we never felt at that stage how we would pay our staff or pay our bills. Whether we were paying ourselves as much as we should be paid is another story, but all the other things that needed to be paid, we actually by that stage had were pretty stabilized. And so we would have as I was saying, we would have a launch an order on Sunday night, and we would have sold more than half of it by the Monday. So we were only doing smallish units, like 50s to 80s over 2 colors, or sometimes 100. So to some people that might not sound a lot, and others that might sound like a lot. Does that make sense? But in reality, we would sell, so if we were putting out 50, we would have probably sold 35 by Monday morning, you know, which then made us feel confident to keep, you know, like to always move forward. So, and that's where we sort of were for about 4 years. And then unfortunately 2020 came along. Yeah. And that just threw so many spanner in the works. The paying of staff, thankfully, was alleviated a lot by receiving the job seeker payment. Yeah, because that took quite a decent amount of pressure off us, and then after that, what happened was that, I can't speak for everybody, but we found that you could no longer guesstimate what would sell and what would not sell. So you never had a crystal ball as such, but you had history that you could look back on and say, okay, in September we're going to sell dresses. If I put a jumper out in May, or I put a blazer out, that's when we're gonna sell it. That's when it needs to come out. I need to do this, not this item, but I need to do a item like this because it always sells. And what we would say is, you know, say it was a blazer, it would be like a Ford with a new bumper bar. Same thing that they do is like it's the same similar silhouette, so that the customer feels confident to buy it, but there'll be tweaks to it. There might be bigger shoulder pads, there might be shorter sleeves, there might be other things, but where it looks different enough for them to have two if they bought the other one, but it actually is, they know that it's going to fit them beautifully because they bought the last one, you know. So they're the things that we learned, you know. But and then after that, when we're still making stock, and even though we kept reducing the amount of stock we made to as low as we could, which was 40 we were very lucky because we had worked with our manufacturers for so long that they wanted to work with us, and we'd stood by them during the times that lockdown, and we kept giving them work. So they saw us, they've always seen us as a family as well. So we're sort of like, you know, together, sort of things like that together. So they were willing to help us out. So we did that, and things were okay, but then the economy would just go up and down, and it wouldn't just go up, down slowly. It would just fall off the edge, you know, like it would be like people are buying again. We think it's going to, like, it looks like it's going to improve. You then make guesses of what you need to make. And even locally, we've still bought fabric, and we've still you know, completed our product development, we've completed our samples, we've completed our grading, so we've spent money in it. And what happens is the fact that even locally, being 3 months probably turnaround from beginning to the end, from when you have an idea to the end, that's still a long time when things fall off the edge. So
totally.
like people offshore, which takes 6 to 9 months, you know, and that they might not be able to get out of things, and they all got all the stock coming in afterwards. So it was really hard, and that's when it became hard to pay staff. That's when it became hard to, we never didn't pay them, but I'm saying that's when we started to get really anxious about whether we could pay bills, whether we, you know, we would have to sometimes borrow money from ourselves, you know, to do all that sort of stuff and work things out. And, you know, we haven't been paid since the pandemic, job seeker, because of the fact that it just wasn't possible. And then it's sort of that we had to let people go, and then we moved to pre-order, because then I felt like that way at least we weren't making what we wouldn't sell, and we wouldn't end up with extra stock. And as I was saying, there's things that literally fell out off the thing where it'd be like going really, really well to July, and then all of a sudden July you'd be selling like, I don't know, let's just throw a number in the air, 100 units, and then in August you'd sell 10. You know, like it would just like die.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't like a little bit, it would just go like, it was like something like either interest rates were up, fires happened, the war in Ukraine, you know, something happens that then people just understandably, you know,
shakes everyone's confidence.
And being the brand we are as well, it's the whole time along, it was like the conversations were always like, if we've got this new thing, if it's calling to you and you need it, and you feel you need it in your wardrobe, buy it. It wasn't like you must have. We never, because we didn't believe that putting pressure, especially during that time, on somebody to even talk about the fact that like we might have to close our doors. Like we made it clear that it was getting tougher, but not as tough as it was, because that's not my customer's problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it
that's
really
right.
isn't my customer's problem. And it's not fair for me to put that onto them, you know, and then for them to buy something that they really shouldn't be buying.
Yeah. And also, were the factories, they wouldn't have been running at full capacity at that point. Were they allowed to even sew it? Sometimes they would be closed down, I'm assuming.
Yeah, there was I think it was only about 12 weeks where they couldn't sew at all, right? Here, locally. But other than that, they could, but that was fine, because we'd already worked out some things that, like by then we'd stopped making. I just stopped all production. Like come March, I went, okay, we're going to be left with fabric, but that's fine, right?
Yeah.
Yes, we pay PhD, but we don't end up left with sort of. I had to go through and go, okay, what are we going to still make? What are we not going to make?
You can't throw good money at bad by making this fabric up that's even spending more money on
absolutely
stock. And
absolutely.
So could you change some of the production to Sydney or New South Wales? I'm not sure if their lockdowns were at the same time as us, or if I don't think they had as many lockdowns as us, like swapping it around so that you could make it in another state or something like that.
It wasn't really the stock. That part wasn't the problem as much, because what we did was we ended up just having a big sale in the first July that it happened, and we just did a big clearance sale and said, look, things are tough for us. We've got too much stock because we bought it for the way things were going to be, etc., etc. We were very honest, like a few times. But when we looked at it, even if we were desperate for stock, it's like having to sample, having to rework with another company, whether in Sydney or Perth or anywhere, and then having to work that through. The way we saw it, pretty much it was myself, because I'm the one that does the production part at that stage. Even though I had a production assistant, it's like I had to make the decisions. We will just, supposedly we're going to be locked down for this much time, and we've already done the samples here. We're already ready. They are ready to make for us as soon as they're allowed to open, right? If we go somewhere else, it could take us more than 12 weeks to perfect this.
Yeah.
Are we better off just continuing? And also it's going to add so much extra stress to all of us. And shipping things, they were getting lost at that time because so much was getting shipped here, there, and everywhere. And we just went, we took we decided to take the risk that it was better to be without stock than to spend money where we didn't know what we would end up with.
Yeah, that's true. So, bit about what do you see yourself doing, if you've got any secrets that can reveal for the future?
Well, the first cab off the rank is I'm doing the Cert 4 in Training and Assessment, which is the VET course, so that I can teach. So hopefully I'll be teaching fashion and entrepreneurship for, as a sessional teacher come July or August next year.
I think you'll be fantastic at that. And also with your background on both of those aspects, I think it'd be amazing.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's like, when I sat down to decide what I wanted to do, and what I loved from Harlow, what I love from Harlow is helping our customer, which is the reason that we started in the first place. And what I wanted to do with my experience was to also help others. Like, I've mentored all the way through anyway. So education is just another way of mentoring. And sharing my experiences. And I love learning from those that are there, or the mentor that's coming to speak to you, because you learn from them, because you think of things in different ways all the time. And it actually makes you rethink things that you think you knew, and you go, oh, actually, I never thought of it that way. I'm also working on the side on a consulting company, which is called Kerry Pietrobon Consulting, but it's like a slashy consulting firm. Because
what are you slashing?
What am I slashing? So it's like, the first one is with my customers. I'm hoping that I might be able to reach out, and some might reach out to me, of brands, small, big, whatever, that might want to extend their sizes, and that I can consult with them of how to do that, and so that it actually fits, so that it actually works for the customer and the customer buys it. And because I was a pattern maker by trade, but I also am a fit specialist. I've done all the fittings for Harlow, but also when I was working for other companies, I'd go to all fits things as well. I sew for myself, so I really know how garment needs to fit and how things can be changed in a pattern as well, and how to grade, because we ended up making our own way of grading to some degree of how we felt it would work for sizes, especially above an 18. Like, we did not stick
it doesn't
to
straight go through.
It just doesn't make sense in some places. This is why sometimes when you put on a plus size top or a jacket, they feel like strap jackets because their armholes are way down here and you can't actually lift your arm. So there's all things that we've sort of worked out how to do. Because the last 5 years, I had a pattern maker that came in. She was a freelancer on contract. On average, probably 1 day a fortnight, and we would always work things out together. So it was like, oh, how do we do that? But if we do that, that won't work. So between us, we've really worked out what we think is the best way to do things, and being able to share with other brands, not telling them what to do, but giving them what we did, and then them figuring out what might be right for them. It's not about telling people what to do, because every brand is different. It's about, even if I say, like, have you thought about how the bicep will thing? And then they go, oh, no, we haven't. Maybe we'll go back and think about it. It's not even, I might not even give an answer, but I've given them a thing to actually think about. This is where we found a challenge. Maybe you should consider that as your grading, all those sort of things. Because what I want is my customer from Harlow to have more choices. And if I can work with other brands, I can give them more choice. Without having a brand, I can still give them a choice of things to purchase. So that's that's one part of the consulting business. And the other part of consulting business is for really any product-based brand, probably more micro and small rather than bigger brands in this area. But I'm calling myself your no bullshit bestie. So it's like, I'm that girlfriend that you go to that when you ask them a question, they don't go, oh yeah, that sounds like a lovely idea. They say, oh, you're going to do that. So when you do that, so it's about similar, asking the questions. Like, so if you're going to put that much money in marketing and doing this marketing thing, what do you expect to get from that? How is that going to happen? It's not saying, oh, this is going to happen, that won't work, this won't work. None of that. It's like, have you actually considered all the reasons why you're doing this and where you're putting your energy? And talking through things with these with brands who often are on their own. So that's why people like, consulting like that is needed, is just being able to say things out loud sometimes to somebody. You can answer your own question. And
that's the best way.
Yeah. And my idea is more the fact to ask the question so you can give yourself your answers.
Yeah.
So I'll know that sort of thing. But I also can, give advice on things like, because we did all our own back end of Shopify. We did all our back end of we did MailChimp and then Klaviyo. So there's all that sort of stuff we did ourselves, and we didn't use contractors. So we actually understand that when you change this, what repercussions come. So it's not just like, oh, make this pretty thing. Oh, but that's going to stuff up your back end. So we have that sort of planning. So even if it's like bouncing off ideas and saying, well, have you considered what that might do to that? And again, it just stops them from hopefully not making mistakes that we made, for example, or just having somebody in that regard. And I'm also offering, just on the side, if people need it, like welcome flows, things like that, Shopify product descriptions, loading things up for people, etc.
Yeah.
Anything that I can do at the time right now as I'm starting out, because as you start out, you also have to realize what people need and what they don't need.
And you don't know what your niche is going to be. Yeah.
And what I'm going to enjoy, and that's what it's about. So I did a survey recently and haven't had a chance to have a look through it yet, but I sent it out to a whole lot of people, and I think I've got about 50 or so answers. So hopefully I'll get some feedback on what might be needed, but I'm working on that as well. So hopefully between the two of them, I'll,
work out
a bit of both ways.
Work out what you want to do. Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Kerry, for popping on today. It's been so interesting. I love hearing people's stories, and this is a great one.
No, thank you for having me.
No problems. We'll talk again soon.